One of the things it's so fascinating about this topic that it actually has anticipated our current understanding of the pattern and process of human evolution, which itself has gone through an evolution of sorts. So this raises an interesting question. In light of the persistent reports of wildmen, of non-human wildmen around the world, whether it's Sasquatch or the Yeti or the Yeren or the Almas or the Orang Pendek, I mean, the list of names is longer than my arm.
My name is Derek Randles. I am the co-founder of the Olympic Project. The Olympic Project is approximately 12 years old. Ever since 1985, August of 1985, I've been into Sasquatch research because of an event that literally changed my life.
It's 1963, and I have my own encounter where I hear an audio vocalization. It was two sounds melded into one scream or roar. And I was maybe 30 feet from it when it roared.
凌晨4点，我们到这个群须雅寺这个地方。当时我们其他的几个，嘿，你们注意注意，前头有一个样子嘞，有个东西，就在他的面前击杀。实际上我们离这个动物呢，大概不到1米，砸他的腿。蔡师傅呢，一个是开着大灯，第二个呢，他是
Just answered. Try it again.
Back in the 60s and 70s, there was a notion, a paradigm that was central to anthropology, the idea that there could be only one hominin species occupying an exclusive hominin niche. The sort of ecological principle that no two species can occupy the same niche was incorporated into the fabric of anthropology and influenced the way the fossil record was viewed. And so human evolution was seen as this single file march, this very singular procession of one species giving rise to another and being succeeded by it, and so on down the pike. We now know, however, that rather than this single file march, there was this bushy tree, this diversity of hominins that existed across the landscape at any given slice of time in the past, and that many of those branches on this bushy tree have persisted alongside our own lineage until much more recently than had ever been acknowledged.
Since the days of ancient Mesopotamia, man-like humanoids have appeared in myths and legends of cultures all around the world. Over 4,000 years ago, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the best-known wild man tale of that day was of Enkidu, a beast-like man that was tamed and befriended by the great Sumerian king Gilgamesh. Was this tale a reflection of a humanoid that actually existed during this time? Or was Enkidu just an expression of an archetype in the human psyche, linked to the wilderness from which we have evolved? Today, the best-known wild man that people still report seeing roaming the wilds of North America is better known as the Sasquatch or Bigfoot. But there are other well-known legends of wild men from across the globe, such as the Yeti, said to have lived in the wilds of the Himalayan mountains. Yeti is a word that was first sensationalized by mountaineers Eric Shipton and Dr. Michael Ward in their quest to conquer Mount Everest back in 1956. Based on a famous line of tracks that were found and photographed by these men on the Menlung Glacier in Nepal, the foot morphology seemed to stand out compared to other wild men, at 5 inches wide and 11 inches long. These tracks would appear to resemble a more ape-like foot, bearing finger-like appendages.
In light of our growing understanding of the tremendous diversity of hominin evolution, the adaptive radiation, and the very possible, very probable survival of relic populations of some of these lineages, it's quite fascinating that the footprints line up with several of those possibilities. So for example, we've got Sasquatch, this giant form, which has a foot that's remarkably elegantly adapted to such a creature, a large, heavy creature walking bipedally on flat feet. We have the Russian almas, which could very likely be a relic Neanderthal or maybe Denisovan. Its footprints, its sightings occur in areas where we also have the fossil remains of Neanderthals in the most remote corners of its former range across Europe and Western Asia. It's a much closer relative to us. Therefore, it has a foot that more resembles ours. It has an arch. It's a low arch, but it's a very broad, stout foot with splayed toes that suggest it has not, confined its feet in shoe wear as we often do. Over here, we've got the best evidence, in my opinion, of the Yeti, or the abominable snowman, as it's popularly known. It basically looks like a chunky chimpanzee with shorter, stout digits, but a divergent big toe. In this case, it's sort of aligned with the other toes, but I think that's just because it was walking through a snowfield. But clearly has the capability of prehensile grip. It was probably, or is probably, an arboreal species, one that spends a great deal of time in trees, foraging for food and seeking shelter.
But Yeti has become a blanket term, used to refer to all kinds of wildmen sightings across Europe, Asia, and Russia. Furthermore, there are many lesser-known wildmen humanoid cryptids, such as the Russian Almas. The Almasty are believed to be inhabitants of isolated areas in Central Asia, such as the Caucasus, Pamir mountain ranges, and the Altai Mountains of southern Mongolia. Almas are often described as robust human-like creatures that are around 5 to 6 feet tall, covered in brown hair, and walk in a bipedal manner. The facial features that have been reported in sightings have given rise to a particular theory about their origins.
The mystery of the Yeti's existence was revealed by the residents of the Krymsky region. A few days ago, on the edge of the Merchansky settlement, people found enormous human prints, and later, with their own eyes, they saw an unknown creature. According to the locals, it wasn't tall, around 5 feet 7, with long, reaching his knees arms, and covered with fur from head to toes. The locals assumed it was the legendary Bigfoot. We saw it with the guys, and thought, what kind of monster is that? They all wondered. It was visibly covered with hair, no clothes or anything, and as soon as it saw the approaching car, it dashed across the road into the woods. According to the eyewitnesses, the Yeti easily jumped over the 6-foot river and ran away with unusual for a human being speed. All day today, a couple of dozens of local residents were brushing through the woods in the search of the Yeti.
Пипец, короче, тихо. Он, короче, опять на нас попер, наверное. Сейчас заснимем, если что, на YouTube выложим.
Вон, смотри,
тихо. Блин, он движется сюда.
Я боюсь. Вон, смотри.
Тихо.
Он ветки не шевелит, по-моему.
Я ничего не вижу. О, вон, передвигается. Чучело.
Смотри, ветки шатаются. Смотри.
О, побежал!
Пошли.
Я заснял его.
Чтоб не испугать его, пошли.
Я заснял.
Смотри.
Ё-моё!
Испуги-то килограмм 200 весит.
Угу. Видел, как он своими лапами машет?
Смотри,
вон он.
2 метра рост.
Ёп!
Я боюсь.
Надо отдать эту съемку в НТВ.
Да.
Чрезвычайное положение. Всё.
Побежали.
So what I'm seeing is something that's inhuman. I don't believe it's a suit. It's all one uniform color, like a gray, blue, silver type of color. Maybe like a dark gray. The legs are very long, and also the upper body, the torso is very long compared to like a human. The head is around here, You can just about see the head coming at the shot at this point, as it appears to glance to the left, possibly. But look at the angle of where the knee is. It's almost touching the chest as it goes along here. And even in such an awkward position, it moves away very naturally and freely and smoothly. Nothing awkward looking. Let's take an even closer look. Scrub back and forth here. Oh, this one. The jump. And it seems to run and get down on all fours and run away quite fast. Just there. Down and gone. You can see what seems to be muscle tone on the back. Head is not visible from the back, which means it's very low down. No sign of the head whatsoever. So I believe this is a real creature. What it is, I can't tell. We know Bigfoot have been known to go on all fours and move in unusual ways. Is this a Russian Yeti? I don't think so. But that's just my opinion. What it is, I don't know.
Man-like humanoids have appeared in myths and legends of cultures all around the world. The Yeren man-ape, which is commonly known as a Chinese relative to Bigfoot.
它是直立行走，这个样子像人。
嘴巴是凸出去来的，耳朵是竖起来的，
全身都是毛发，就是包括脸面上也有绒毛。
Nearly 8,000 species live in Shenongjia Forest in central China. But there is one that is the most famous. For centuries, locals here have claimed there is a monster living in the forest. Yuan Yuhao heard the stories. He said he didn't believe them until one day in 1981.
这天呢，我呢带着猎狗来着，边考察边打猎。嘿，下开大概走了大概是500米左右。 这2只狗子发出一个怪叫，我就赶快上山去。用视野好啊，看到对面开花，这个坡呢，发现一个褐红的直立行走的人形动物，速度相当快，但是它不是跑的。队长下令，原因好，赶快卧倒。我贴他表师傅把子弹推上膛来以后，正在瞄准的时候，好，国军说千万不能开枪。 你开那枪，如果是说打的不是野人，如果是人的话，野人没搞到啊，把人打伤了，打死了，怎么办呢？我就没开枪。我是身高1.85米，这个柱子呢，它不止1.85米啊，因为我这个头在柱子里面露不出来呀，它可以露出一个头出来，那么估计最低2.2米。
The locals call it a Yeren or wildman. Stories of its existence can be found in ancient poetry books dating back thousands of years. In the last 4 decades, there have been more than 120 reported sightings. Those who claim to have seen it describe an ape-like creature with facial features that resemble a human. They say it is covered from head to toe with long brownish hair. It also has unusually large feet. Its footprint measures 48 centimeters long. Li Guohua used to work as a lumberjack in Shenongjia. He claims to have had a glimpse of the creature 5 times between 1980 and 2005.
1980年2月28日，我在那里也碰见过野人，在山里找野人，突然走那个山崖下，坐在那儿休息，突然看见听扑扑啦啦的响声，我的定睛一看，一个野人正朝我走过来，非常的高大，有2.5米以上，我就拿这个土铳瞄准他，即使我那时也没照相机，即使把他打伤了以后，他跑不动了，我能看一下那个一口枪，那个土铳没有打响。结果那个野人就转身就慢慢走掉了，那个雪地上留下很长很长的一个大脚印。
As well as ordinary villagers, former local official Chen Liancheng also claims to have seen the Yeren when he worked in Shenongjia in 1976.
我们去云阳地委参加农事工作会，凌晨4点。我们到这个群须雅是这个地方，当时我们其他的几个人呢都在差不多昏昏欲睡。吉普车一转弯的时候呢，司机蔡师傅呢就说：“哎，你们注意，前头有一个样子嘞，有个东西，就在他的面前急刹。实际上我们离这个动物呢大概不到1米的地方。我们当时3个人下车，抓了个石头啊，就砸他的腿子。蔡师傅呢，一个是开着大灯，第二个呢他是按喇叭，他吓他弓着身子走路，走过了这个公路，他就准备爬坡跑上去呢就又滚下来，再往前头走一步啊，就是这个灌木丛，一站到灌木丛里面就看不见了。
You know, it points to the very likely source that the species, that Sasquatch originated, as did so many other mammals that now are common to North America, in Asia, and expanded its range into North America by way of the Bering Lang Bridge.
Chen reported the sighting to China's top research body, the Chinese Academy of Sciences. A year later, in 1977, the authorities organized an official expedition. The Yeren sighting made national headlines. The expedition team combed through Shenongjia forest, but found no evidence of the monster. There haven't been any other official investigations since, but that hasn't stopped individual citizens from searching for it. Yu Jun has devoted nearly 40 years to finding the Yeren. He recorded thousands of hours of infrared camera footage in the forest to try and capture the beast on video.
2015年冬天，在当地呢一个山崖处啊，本来是去拍老虎的，结果无意中啊就拍到了一个直立的一个侧身，胳膊腋下下垂的毛尖，没有拍到完整的图像。熊的话是没有下垂毛尖的，它不会下垂，它没有那么长的毛。在前后这个图片对比当中呢，就发现这图片呢，我感觉像是就说是个野人的一个侧面的图像。当地人呢上山的时候看到野人，被吓跑了。我们以后再请他带着我们去找到了10-20个窝，而且在每个窝里呢找到了一些毛发。从毛发本身来讲，它很特殊，用放大镜看上去就是放大的人发，虽然颜色不同，它区别于当地所有动物。北京台做节目呢，找到这个华大基因，他们给做了一次毛发鉴定，他是说做的是线粒体 DNA， 给了我一个报告，和已知动物啊全都配不上，怀疑这个和灵长类动物的同源性较高。
Other explorers have found what they say is evidence of the Yeren's existence, but they haven't been able to convince officials or scientists. Wu Xinzhi, a professor at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, took part in another expedition for a Yeren in southwest China's Yunnan province in 1961. His group determined locals had mistaken some gibbons in the forest for the legendary monster.
一般的人呢好奇，那么于是呢也缺乏一种 这个科学的知识吧，所以呢就容易信，信呢它也容易传。我是不相信的，因为我是觉得，一方面没有直接的证据，一方面呢，在目前的传说有野人的这些地区的话，特别是农家跟西双版纳没有野人生存的这种条件。还有呢，他如果是野人的话呢，他一定要有一个群体，只有个别的，那就他死了就没了。所以虽然我自己没有到神农架去调查，但是我也
The Yeren, as it is called, translates to wild man, and it's remarkably similar in the description of its stature, its covering with hair, its behaviors. The only thing that contrasts really is the slightly more frequent description of a reddish-brown color to that hair, whereas in North America, brown to dark brown or black seems to be the most common color phase described by eyewitnesses. But in many respects, it's remarkably similar. This came home all the more profoundly when I had the opportunity to visit with some investigators, a witness in China, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Yuan, who had seen a Yeren while working as a ranger in the Shenanjia Nature Reserve in Hubei Province in central China, located in the highlands of central China. He described something that was absolutely parallel to witness descriptions of the Sasquatch, and on top of that, he found a set of tracks and successfully cast a right and a left footprint. Now, what was so remarkable about this was that upon examining those tracks, which I had the privilege of doing firsthand, we discovered that they were remarkably similar, almost identical in many respects, to those of the Sasquatch. In particular, a very distinctive specimen that has played a key role in my interpretation of the model of the functional morphology of the foot of the Sasquatch and how it's distinguished from a typical human foot and footprint. In fact, I had given Mr. Yuan a reprint of an article in which I had described some of these adaptations and had illustrated a 3D scan of this cast made by Bob Titmus at the Patterson-Gimlin film site, no less, in Northern California in 1967. Mr. Yuan became very excited and animated when he looked at these figures, and it became very apparent why when he unveiled from his little suitcase his specimens. And you can see here as they're compared, they show this remarkable pressure ridge, this mid-tarsal pressure ridge. They even show with a little more distinction, I think partly due to the breadth and perhaps larger mass of this individual, this feature here, this sort of double-arched feature, which, not to be confused with the arch of a foot, but just these two prominences which indicate the presence of the key joints in the midfoot, the talonavicular and the calcaneocuboid joint.
Can those be found in the human foot?
They can. These are joints that are present in the human foot, in all mammals for that matter, and they comprise what we call together the transverse tarsal joint, which in a human twists into a closed, packed, very stable position and creates a rigid arch. But in the Sasquatch and in other non-human primates who retain a much greater degree of flexibility, the heel moves somewhat independently of the forefoot. So when a Sasquatch walks, as you can see illustrated here, this is my interpretation of this particular feature of the Sasquatch footprint. Whereas the human with its rigid arch as the heel elevates, the entire foot acts as a lever, with the fulcrum located here at the ball, particularly of the big toe. The Sasquatch, on the other hand, its heel elevates while weight is transferred still through the entire forefoot due to the ability to flex here at the transverse tarsal joint. And here, sometimes weight will push some material up into the now vacant heel impression and create this pressure ridge in the footprint itself. I was the first to draw attention to this feature, the first to offer an interpretation that was consistent with the comparative anatomy of great apes and humans. And, but that wasn't published until the late 90s. And yet here we have a set of footprints cast by someone who has no training in anatomy and functional morphology, or the evolutionary history of the human and non-human ape foot. And yet in the early 90s, almost a decade before I had published, he presents evidence or collects evidence that, that incorporates this very morphology. I mean, talk about, not only does this reiterate the interpretation that I've proposed, but it so dramatically, in my mind, demonstrates the legitimacy of this specimen due to its remarkable consistency and the presence of a similar creature in Asia, in China here specifically, which, once you get north through Siberia, is close at hand to the mountainous forests of the Pacific Northwest.
We also hear of the Dev, with many reported sightings found to be in the Unai mountain pass around the Sunlak Mountains of Afghanistan. In this video, which was shared by NVTV, shot in Iraq, the claim is that this is a Bigfoot. Tales have been told of the Dev, or jinns, which are considered to be wild men or evil beasts that live in forested mountain regions of Iraq. We hear two frightened men approaching the creature, who appear to be speaking Arabic and are apparently praying for protection. What is notable about this video, in congruence to other reports of Sasquatch-related wild men, we see that this creature appears to have eye shine, thick black fur, and a coned-shaped head similar to a gorilla. The most remarkable feature of the creature in this video is that it seems to be constantly showing its teeth as the men approach. Through researching primate behavior, an observable truth to chimpanzees is that they show their teeth, as if smiling, whenever they feel threatened or afraid. The smile of chimpanzees has been well documented as a fear grimace by wildlife biologists. This could be the case for observable behavior from the creature in the video from Iraq.
والله يسيطر والله بسم الله الرحمن لا تخاف ما دام الله ويانا لا تخاف ما يقدر يسوي لنا فرد شيء لا تخاف لا تخاف سحب على كيفك انسحب بس شوف هاي السوادة يا ستار بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
Skeptics who would watch this video might state that this is just a man in a suit. But if that was the case, how did they achieve the effect of the eyes shining? The human eye lacks the ability to create this effect like an animal can, and this is also a feature commonly reported by people who have experienced wild men sightings at night. The Dev has also been reported to be seen in the Tatra Mountains area, close to Poland, Slovakia, and other parts of Eastern Europe. In this next video, apparently shot in the Tatra Mountains, we see a creature very reminiscent in stature to the Sasquatch.
Mamy zbliżenie. Jest koźita? Jest tam koźita. O, ja to masz tam na górze. Tak,
no to w ogóle nice creature.
No masz, a ty tam coś za kamieniem wydawało mi się ruszało. Co tam jest? Widzisz? Zobacz, tam na lewo od kozicy, co jest? O kurde. Pokaż to na tym. O kurde, masz to? Weź to, masz to? Gdzie to jest? Tu, tutaj, o kurde, co to jest?
Niedźwiedź?
Nie. Nie no, niedźwiedź tak nie chodzi. Co to jest? Do kozicy, co to jest?
To most people, and skeptics especially, this may not seem to be a very important or credible video. There are, however, some notable hallmarks to the physiology of this creature. Its movement and posture are very similar to many eyewitness reports of Sasquatches. We see an almost cone-shaped head, along with a stooped walking posture, covered from head to toe in black fur. Its knees seem to stay mostly bent while walking, unlike that of a human when walking upright. It also seems tall and wide in stature from such a distance. Dr. Meldrum has also investigated more examples of international wildmen through prints and reports that came from multiple specimens in Russia and Eastern Europe.
For example, I have a specimen that was collected in the Caucasus Mountains, the North Caucasus, and witnessed by literally the entire village. A long line of tracks, of which a right and a left were cast and were curated by a museum director there in the village, and who was kind enough to share these with us. For all intents and purposes, these look remarkably like a Sasquatch track. Here's an example of one. You can see the remarkable breadth, the splay, the mobility of the toes that are so characteristic of the Sasquatch track. Its flat-footedness, the lack of a longitudinal arch, evidence of a greater degree of midfoot flexibility, all which seem to be adaptations of a very large, heavy biped for negotiating very uneven, steep, mountainous terrain. Well, in a small village in the North Caucasus, there was a disturbance, a sighting by a handful of villagers of this giant, hairy, man-like creature that made its way through town, and in the process left hundreds, if not thousands, of extremely clear footprints in the fresh snow and mud. These were witnessed by virtually the entire village, and one of the local gentlemen made very successfully a pair of footprint casts documenting this sighting. I was able to visit with a couple of those villagers. One in particular is a very experienced outdoorsman, a naturalist who is a professional guide, as well as a parliamentarian in their government. So a very intelligent man who, with whom we compared notes and photographs of Sasquatch tracks, and he was very cognizant of the distinctions between a human footprint and what we were seeing. I mean, not only in size, but in the functional morphology. This, the local designation of this creature is the Dev, short for the devil. And it's remarkably similar to early accounts of Sasquatch. Before the word Sasquatch and Bigfoot became common, these were mountain devils. They were equated with demons and goblins and devils. And so it's remarkably convergent in that respect as well. Its description and its behaviors, its lack of material culture, tools, clothing, fire, etc., all remarkably parallel the descriptions and the profile that emerges from all of these encounters and descriptions of eyewitnesses for the Sasquatch. And so, yet clearly of independent origin as far as the understanding of these creatures. But I think they certainly share a common source, a common ancestor, if you will. And if they constitute separate species, that's very possible given the duration of separation and distinction between the two. So excellent evidence, in my opinion, that there is continuity between Asia and North America in the distribution of this particular species. Like I said, so many other species of mammal which we take for granted as being native to North America actually had their origins in Asia and have extended their range at various times into North America.
Bigfoot has been debated for decades, some saying the legendary creature is real, others dismissing it as a hoax. But people in the First Nations community of Ahousaht near Tofino are big believers now, especially after one of its fisheries officers had a close encounter with one last week. And they've got the photographic evidence they say proves it. CTV's Gord Kurbis takes us to the scene of the sighting.
You can see the tracks right there.
Luke Swan points out the location where just days ago, him and a group of others saw a series of massive footprints.
It was 16 inches long with a measuring tape. That was from the heel, the toe, the big toe, and then the width of them from toe to toe was 7 to almost 8 inches long.
Swan is here to look for further evidence that may have been left behind where his son says he spotted what he says is a Sasquatch.
Well, the first thing in my mind was to get off the beach. I pushed off as fast as I could and got to deep water.
Swan's son is Luke Jr., an officer with Ahousaht Fisheries. He was on routine patrol last Wednesday, arriving at White Pine Beach when he saw something sitting on this log, which then stood upright.
Something really big stood up, probably between 8 or 9 feet, something. It was huge. It had broad shoulders. I seen it from the side, and when I turned, it had huge shoulders.
There was 8 to 10 footprints all along, indicating that it walked that way.
The tide is high now, but when he was here last week, the older Swan and others from the community of Ahousaht looked for signs of the legendary creature. They saw and photographed several footprints through the grass and mud. They fought with difficulty to follow where the creatures walked with ease, and even noted bark pulled off a cedar tree 8 feet in the air.
We went further into a stream, into the river, and found more footprints, so it's out there.
The fisheries officer, who's been up close and personal with all sorts of wildlife, including bears, says this was no bear.
When I saw it, it scared me. It's something, a lot of people probably want to see it, but in the end it might scare them too. I don't wish it upon anybody.
He's had several days to reflect on the mystery of what he witnessed that day and knows he is one of only a limited number of people who can claim to have seen a Sasquatch. But he says it's an encounter he wouldn't want to repeat. Gord Kurbis, CTV News, Ahousaht.
North America is by far the hottest spot in the world for wildmen sightings. For thousands of years, native indigenous tribes of the Americas have handed down stories of Sasquatch through oral history. And every year, more and more videos are published online. We reached out to Tim Wells to verify the authenticity of his video. And his answer was that it is as real as can be. Is this just a man in a suit? And someone's attempt to create viral YouTube clickbait? It's noticeable that the subject in this video isn't remarkably tall. There's no presence of a cone-shaped head, and it also has a noticeably long neck. With this in consideration, it seems to be a fake when compared to other sightings which have been reported. Undoubtedly, there have been many hoaxes, including a famous hoax where a man died wearing a gorilla suit after being hit by a car on a highway at night. As reports from across North America become more prevalent, from people who go camping, hunting, and exploring in the wilderness, one must be skeptical of whether these reports are real or fake. In this video, a man in Mississippi allegedly stumbles upon a wild man. Are these elaborate hoaxes? Or, if there is smoke, should we expect fire? Every year, large amounts of people travel to conferences across North America to discuss recent sightings and research related to Sasquatch. One of these immensely popular conferences is the Sasquatch Summit, just outside of Seattle, Washington.
So here we go. I was over in Russia at the invitation.
We traveled to this conference to interview a group of men who claim to have found and researched a nesting ground in the Olympic National Park. They theorize this nesting ground could possibly belong to a familial group of Sasquatch.
My name is Derek Randles. I am the co-founder of the Olympic Project. The Olympic Project is approximately 12 years old. I've been into research for 35 years this coming August, and I'm a landscape contractor and a wilderness guide here in Washington State. Ever since 1985, August of 1985, I've been into Sasquatch research because of an event that literally changed my life. So, and what that event was is back in those days, again, I was 20 years old, top shape, myself and a couple other people. It was our hobby to off-trail hike in the Olympic National Forest and the Olympic National Park. And on one of these outings, we were approximately 8 miles up the staircase trail in the Olympic National Park. And we left trail to go do some exploring before we left the trail completely. It was getting late in the day. We came up on a bench ridge, approximately a quarter mile away from the main trail. And we were looking around for a good place to camp, a level place to camp. Anyway, so I was in the process of doing that, and Jim and Mike, my friends, were spreading out their tents, we're ready to make camp. And we always kind of went off trail at least, a couple, 200-300 yards in case we wanted to explore the next day. So if other hikers came by, they wouldn't mess with our stuff. So that's why we would leave trail to that distance. Anyway, so I'm clipping branches, and Jim and Mike are unrolling their bedrolls, and we hear this crash quartered up to the left of us. And at the moment, the only thing I could think of is maybe it was an elk taking off or a bear or something startling and running and making a large ruckus. And so we all just stopped and looked up to the left of us. And we were in a little bit of a clearing, and probably about 20, 30 yards back, there was a timber line. And we're just looking back at this and we couldn't see anything. And as we're looking in this direction, this rock flies and it lands about 10 feet to the left of us. And it was probably maybe a little bit bigger than a softball. And we were just dumbfounded. Here we are, we're 8 miles up. We're in an area that has no roads. There's no people up there, and something just threw a rock at us. There was no cliff there. It wasn't something falling off of a cliff. It was thrown. And we all just froze. And it wasn't really even scary yet. We're all just, what? And then again, another rock came. And the weird thing is it probably landed about 3 feet from the first rock, which were about 10 feet to the left of us. And again, we're just dumbfounded. And then fear started to kick in a little bit. And then all of a sudden another stone comes. And this one, we all saw, it was either the second or the third one, we saw very clearly that it arced and then landed, which meant that it was thrown. Throwing takes pretty much an opposable thumb, not something deer and elk do. And at that point, everybody just started to panic. And as we're panicking and starting to pick our stuff up off the ground, another rock comes and lands. And the weird thing was they were not thrown directly at us, but they were thrown in our direction, but they were all to the left of us. And then as we're picking our stuff up off the ground, they start coming to the right of us and landing. And at this point, we're all just starting to freak out, you know, because a couple of them were fairly sizable, not huge, but, you know, pretty good sized rocks. And we were just like, we need to get out of here. That was the main feeling of the moment, is we need to leave now. So the funny thing is, we didn't take time to put our backpacks on. We just picked stuff up off the ground and started running down this ridge rapidly. And it was a fairly steep ridge, not horribly steep, but fairly steep. And we're going down pretty quick, and Jim and Mike were in front of me, and then I remembered that I had a pistol in my backpack. So I kind of skidded to a stop. I was probably only, I don't know, I'd only gone in maybe 30 yards from where we started. And I retrieved this pistol out of my backpack, and I just looked back before I continued down, and this thing had stepped out into the open. It was standing there, probably about 60, 65 feet from me. And I didn't know what to do. Here I am looking at this silhouette of this giant ape thing, and then I was just panic-stricken at that point. And I looked at it for a second. Now the light was fading, so I didn't get a lot of great detail, but what I did get was just this perfect classic silhouette, something very similar to like what you see in a Patterson-Gimlin film, maybe bigger and broader, and I would assume maybe a male. That's just kind of the feeling I had, but I turned, spun, and ran. And got down to the trail, met up with Jim and Mike. We just took enough time to put our backpacks on, and we started running back towards the trail. Well, now it's just about dark. And the funny thing was I forgot that I was even really holding a pistol. After what I had seen, I just wanted out of there. And there's more to the story, but that's literally what got me into it. And more stuff happened a couple weeks after that. I found my first set of tracks up there. And I basically just sailed into research at that point and haven't looked back. That's what got me into it.
After speaking with Derek, we were able to speak with Shane Corson and David Ellis about their research related to this possible nesting ground that they found in the Olympic National Park. The fascinating thing about their research is that it relates to other wildmen accounts around the world where people have found so-called nests. This man found a Yeren nest site in China, and apparently hair from one of these nests. This hair was sent to be tested in a lab, and the data that came back from the lab tests suggests that the hair comes from something that is genetically human-like. Shane Corson explains how this nest site in the Olympic National Park bears similar data to nest sites found in China.
So tell me about the nest research and why it's so prevalent, how it kind of relates to gorilla nests that have been found.
Well, yeah, I mean, with this particular nest site that's been, the Olympic Project did not find this nest site. It was brought to our attention by a timber agent, a timber cruiser. And it's very unique because though there have been other possible nests found throughout history and sometimes pointed towards the direction of Sasquatch, to date we found 22 nests total, 22. And not only 22 nests, ground nests. 2 of those nests happen to be in bushes 2.5 feet off the ground, built into the huckleberry. So that's profound. And these nests range in size from anywhere from 2 foot in size to over 9 feet in size, over 1 foot in depth, predominantly made out of huckleberry, completely made out of huckleberry. And as Dr. Meldrum, when he came out, noticed that some of the huckleberry stems were shoved into the ground and the nest was formulated around that. So it wasn't just haphazardly built together. You know, it wasn't like a bear where it will scrape up some bark and lay down there. This is completely different. This was intentional. It was well thought out. When it comes to gorillas usually make a bed a night, every night. In this case, these were made, I believe, for more than one night, possibly a couple of days, possibly a week, maybe a couple of weeks. I think it had everything to do with the natural resources in the area, the huckleberry, the deer, and all the ungulates, and all the mushrooms and foliage in that area that were easily consumable, including the seasonal salmon creek down below, which has, in some years, and this particular year that the nests were located, as much salmon you could walk across. I mean, just full. I mean, just tons of protein.
Well, I was invited not too long ago to examine an interesting site that was discovered up here on the Olympic Peninsula on the Puget Sound side. There was a timber cruiser who was marking out some stands of timber for harvest and stumbled upon a remarkable find. He was an experienced outdoorsman, had spent many, many years in the field, and this was unlike anything he had seen. It was a collection, a series of beds, nests, if you will. And these bore remarkable resemblance to the ground nests made by gorillas in Africa. Now, bears do make nests, but they essentially scrape material from the forest floor, the duff or bark from a tree. This, however, these examples of nests had a much more complicated structure. We actually took one of the nests and we literally cut right down through a pie wedge and examined the stratigraphy of how they were constructed, taking that bit apart and collecting all the materials. There was an undercarriage of sticks, you know, fairly good sized sticks, broom handle sized sticks, that created a sort of a platform upon which more material was piled. And then the nests were located behind an immense stand of evergreen huckleberries, and these bushes stand a good 7-8 feet tall, and the top spriggers had been snapped off, had pinched off, and those green boughs not piled but woven into the surface of this nest in such a way that it had a raised lip and a depressed center area, and or they, not just it, because there were 5 or 6 of them, and it was quite fascinating.
So it's a no-brainer that if this indeed is a Sasquatch sort of thing, if Sasquatch does indeed make nests, they had everything they needed to stay there comfortably a couple of days or long-term, based on the natural resources, the cover, and the shelter. It's a really unique find, and it does look very similar to nest sites. And we've had zoologists out to this area, and biologists, and many academic individuals come out to this area. And they've all left dumbstruck and sometimes just absolutely amazed, especially when you have some of the zoologists we have had come out, look at these nests that work directly with bonobos and gorillas and other primates like chimpanzees, and they're looking at these nests going, looks kind of like what I've seen in Africa, looks like what I've seen at my zoo that I work in. It's just a really unique find. And so, it's been a pleasure working on this last couple of years, even finding some, unknown hair, what we call unknown or suspect hair. The hair in these nests match other unknown hairs. Both the Cindy Dosen of Homini Enigma, that's part of the Olympic Project, has looked and visually analyzed these hairs, as well as Dr. Meldrum and his lab students, and they match primate hairs. They lack a medulla. And if you think of a hair, as in terms like a pencil, it would be the lead in the middle of that pencil. That's what the medulla would look like. And these hairs lack that. Well, They don't match anything up here in the Pacific Northwest. No. So that's pretty unique. And I mean, that's just one of the unique finds, other than, you know, we found tracks in this area. And of course, we have these very, very unusual nests and large nests and well constructed in a remote area.
By the time I had seen them, the leaves had dropped, so it even had more the appearance of a bird nest than previously. We took core samples from the center of these nests upon examining them, and of the material that they were comprised of, and that was frozen and sent to Dr. Todd Disotell at NYU, New York University, for analysis by methods of environmental DNA analysis. The results were not entirely satisfying. He did detect a primate DNA sample, but concluded that on the basis of the sequence it was human, which means it was either by way of contamination or you know, whatever else, just contamination of handling the specimens, although we went to great lengths to make sure that we did not ourselves contaminate the samples that we were collecting. This raised a serious question in my mind, and that was, did we have sufficient DNA sequence in order to conclusively determine that this was or was not a human? The question has to be acknowledged, or the fact has to be acknowledged, that if these creatures exist, they're going to be extremely closely related to us. Chimps differ by just a few percentage points in their DNA sequence, which means you have to sequence a fair amount of DNA or know specifically where there are distinctions to be identified. I've raised this question with other geneticists. You know, is a few thousand base pairs sufficient? And the consensus has been, no, we should sequence the entire mitochondrial genome and at least a dozen nuclear genes to boot. Of course, that's a lot more labor intensive and expensive to carry out that analysis, but that's what it's going to take to make sure that we find on these parallel sequences enough distinguishing characteristics to know that it is or is not a human sample that we're dealing with.
All I can tell you is that we have these large nests that throughout history have been found in remote locations with the same characteristics with the seasonal salmon creeks. In fact, tidbit is 1967, during the Patty film, 1967, Lyle Laverty, Daniel Perez, who does the Bigfoot Times magazine or pamphlet, and he interviewed a guy by the name of Lyle Laverty. And this guy was a timber cruiser. He worked for a timber company back in 1967. He came across a nest above Scorpion Creek, which fed into Bluff Creek, which was really in close proximity to where the Patterson-Gimlin film was filmed. Yeah, so there was a nest found. Could there have been more? Sure, but that would, we'll never know. But he did find impressions not too far away that were probably Patty. So there have been many, many nests found throughout the years, and I'm sure there've been many, many nests found, especially on some of these timber areas where they got a job to do. They're not paying attention. They're mowing through the areas. In fact, some of the areas we're looking at now, there may have been nests there, but they're no longer there because they've been timbered and demolished. And that's unfortunate, but I don't blame them. They got a job to do. There have been many nests found. And so what's extraordinary is we have a guy that's been doing this for over 30 years, this timber surveyor, cruiser. He's been doing this for like 25, 30 years. He's never seen in all of his career anything like this. And when he came across the first original 2 or 3, he was floored. He was blown away. He had never seen in all his years anything like this. And he goes out solo. He's seen bears, he's seen cougars, he's not afraid. He got a little bit weirded out. And eventually contacted my partner, Derek Randalls, and brought Derek out there with another partner in a limit project called James Milling and a couple of DNR guys, the Department of Natural Resources. None of these guys in all the years, which is over 200 years of woods experience, had ever seen anything like this. And so that makes this discovery, no matter what made these nests, And I got a pretty good feeling as to what. But no matter what made them, it's a profound discovery that needs to be looked into scientifically.
David Ellis specializes in recording audio, and he has done this on multiple expeditions that the team has conducted in the Olympic National Park. David also analyzes audio recordings from around the world, all from supposed wildmen encounters. He tells us about some of the encounters he has had, where communication was initiated through rock clacks, wood knocks, and howls by possible wildmen. Remarkably, David has been able to capture many responses over the years.
And I wanted to take it to another level and start documenting, and that's where the audio recording comes in. I got it was called a spion, which is a dish that amplifies sound for my kids for Christmas. And what I did was I went out into to this area where we were having activity, and I could hear something right away when we stepped into the woods that seemed to be flanking our position. You couldn't hear it without this device. So I thought, okay, this is pretty cool. But then we initiated a wood knock. I have a special way that I can do that with a hand clap, and got a response, and this thing is still moving around, and we're having back and forth exchanges, and I'm thinking, wow, this is pretty cool. But then at the end of the day, I have nothing but this story I just told you. I have nothing for you to go, well, how do I know that really happened? So I decided that I'd get a digital recorder and run the audio through the recorder, and then I would have some sort of a history that this really did take place. 2 weeks later, went back to the same location with another investigator, and they're hitting rocks, and all of a sudden we got a response. Oh boy, game on, recorder's on, we're going. And then we start doing this back and forth exchange, and it's yelling, and it's screaming, and it's knocking. So, I mean, I hit this one. I don't want to praise myself, but I hit this one out of the park on my first try at recording. So that got me going full jazzed into the recording aspect of this as far as documentation goes.
Another one. Are you moving? Yeah. I'm gonna hit rocks. Okay. I'm gonna get bigger rocks. It just answered. Yeah. Try it again. Go ahead.
David Ellis now walks us through how he is able to identify the difference between known cataloged wildlife calls and what researchers are encountering in the field that could be coming from wildmen.
Coyote. And there's see all these that populate up?
Mm-hmm. Different species of coyote.
Oh yeah. So now here is a file name, number, and then they tell who recorded it. So let's just open this one up, and I believe they have a spectrogram too. Yeah, see this up here at the top? This is a spectrogram. They do theirs in black and white. You can see that I do mine in color.
Fruit salad.
Yeah. You noted that. Oh my, well, busted. So I think you can see more detail. I'm sure the people that do it this way think they can see more detail. So, you know, it's in the eye of the user. So I'm just glad I have some choices because it really helps me. Detail is where it's at. But anyway, they will do some sort of an
LNS catalog number 125888.
That's a human voice, obviously. Coyote. 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 And then you can pause it and take a good look at that. It's kind of fun to try to guess what you're going to hear. Once you've looked at spectrograms enough, you kind of get an eye for where sounds reside, and you can see that these are going to be in the lower range, and these are going to be in the higher range, over up here up to 10,000 kilohertz.
Right, it's like a predictable pattern that you're constantly seeing because you've seen so many different visualizations of these sounds over the years, yeah?
You're a quick study, Darcy.
So show me some vocalizations that you recorded firsthand that are similar to this long vocalization you got from John out in Ohio.
Okay. These are two howls, one I recorded and one that was recorded in Ohio, it was in the Cuyahoga National Forest. Very close to where the Ohio howl that you have heard talked about before. I thought it was so close to mine that I recorded that it was worth noting. One's a little bit longer than the other, but I think you can see visually why it piqued my interest. I mean, the one on the left is the one that I recorded, and the one on the right was recorded by Charlie Page of the BFRO.
Bioacoustics is the biological study of animals through sound and sight, and it takes a spectrogram of the audio and turns it into something that is akin to a voice print. So it's as technical as looking at something that's very specific, and you can see where things are resonating in specific hertz for a specific time period that tell you that it's a specific animal.
You can point to visual things that you and I can look at and agree upon, whereas did you hear that, or do you understand what I'm hearing, makes very little sense, in science, because you hear things way different than I do. No two people hear things alike. There are people with perfect pitch, and there are the people that have what's called a tin ear, and so it's all based upon how your mind interprets it. Your ear hears, but your mind listens. It's where your mind tells you what you're hearing.
So I was just looking for tidbits of information and came across a video of a baboon, and it was called the Wahoo baboon bark. Well, Wahoo, I had to check that out. I have a recording of something in the woods here in the state of Washington doing that vocalization. So then I realized that I had other things that people had sent me around the country, and it fit that lexicon.
In this particular circumstance, I am comparing the Wahoo baboon bark. So the first sound you hear is the real baboon. The second one is something that I recorded.
spooked it?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever had a skeptic come to you and say most of these sounds you're recording are probably just humans or other known animals that you guys are misidentifying?
Yeah, all the time. You know, skeptics are always out there. It doesn't bother me that people have a skeptical attitude. It would, I suppose, if I were adamant and knew it was a Sasquatch for sure. But, you know, there's always room for doubt. And if you are always thinking that something is Sasquatch, you're going to dilute your own work.
I used to record the sound and then redo it through my own spectrogram and do side-by-side comparisons. But that's how you do it. You do a side-by-side look at what you recorded versus what is real and see if it's different. And why would it be different? And is there the variation outside of the norm of what you would see for, say, a canid or a coyote vocalization?
So it is very important to listen to, you know, what skeptical folks have to say. But if they are not willing to go to this extent, you know, to physically show me visually what they are talking about, I am probably going to smile and shake their hand and thank them for their subjective opinion, and then that's that.
Of all the things people could hoax and falsely describe seeing around the world, the common pattern is that people are supposedly seeing relic hominids that match descriptions of beings that did exist in the fossil record. When this is taken into account, it seems logical to believe these beings may still exist